All right, welcome back, everybody, for another deep dive. Today we are going deep into Florida politics, specifically the recent power struggle between Governor DeSantis and the legislature.
Yeah.
You sent us a whole bunch of articles about this. Seems like it's getting...
it's definitely heating up.
Yeah, there. So to understand what's going on, we need to rewind back to the start of Trump's second term.
Mm-hmm.
DeSantis calls this special session of the legislature focusing on immigration, and he does it right after the inauguration.
Right after. Yeah, it was seen as aligning Florida very much with Trump's agenda and really cementing DeSantis's position as a strong conservative leader.
So he wanted to make a statement.
Yeah.
But what was his approach here? How did he go about this?
Well, it was not subtle. He basically dropped this on the legislature, didn't really negotiate beforehand. And then that's when the pressure tactics started.
Yeah. There were articles talking about how lawmakers were just bombarded with messages. And I even read that DeSantis released their personal cell numbers to constituents and really urged them to call their representatives and demand action on immigration.
Yeah, that's right. It was very aggressive, and it backfired, I think, pretty spectacularly. The legislature usually is pretty compliant with DeSantis, but they decided they'd had enough of this.
They said, we'll handle this ourselves.
Right.
What were their objections?
Well, a lot of people saw the special session as a political stunt, timed more for impact than actual legislative work. There were also some concerns about the constitutionality of some of DeSantis's proposals. But I think beyond the specific issues, there was just this growing sense of frustration with his leadership style, this kind of bullying tactic.
So it wasn't just about the immigration policy. It was really about a power shift.
Absolutely. This was a big declaration of independence from the legislature, a signal that we're not going to be rubber stamping your agenda anymore. And they didn't just talk, they took action. They countered DeSantis's move with their own immigration plan, which they called the Trump Act.
Ah, playing the name game. That's pretty smart.
It's very clever.
So how does this Trump Act actually differ from what DeSantis was pushing for?
Well, on the surface, it seems to align with Trump's policies on immigration, so that makes it hard for DeSantis to oppose it openly. But the devil is in the details, right? The act creates this new Office of State Immigration Enforcement. But instead of giving DeSantis control over it, they put it under the authority of the Agriculture Commissioner, Wilton Simpson.
So they're sidelining DeSantis while still appearing to support Trump's agenda. That's
very clever.
Pretty impressive maneuvering. What else is in this act?
Well, it allocates a huge budget to this new office, which further strengthens Simpson's position. It also includes a provision to end in-state tuition for undocumented students. Now, what's interesting about that is DeSantis himself previously actually supported that very policy.
Well,
yeah.
It's interesting.
Kind of a twist.
So it seems like the legislature really did their homework, hit DeSantis where it hurts, but also they're laying the groundwork for a potential rival here.
Exactly, yeah. And Wilton Simpson all of a sudden becomes this really key player in Florida politics. He's a former state Senate president, and the rumor is that he's thinking about running for governor in 2028.
So by giving him control over immigration enforcement, they're potentially boosting his profile and setting him up as a future challenger.
Yeah, I think that's a very likely outcome of all of this.
And just to add to the drama, their relationship is, I read it was described as icy.
Yeah, they don't get along very well. So that adds another, element of intrigue to this whole thing.
Okay, so we've got DeSantis making the splash on immigration, the legislature pushes back, and then Wilton Simpson emerges as a possible rival.
Right.
The legislature's defiance didn't stop there, though, right?
It didn't.
There was that $56 million that DeSantis vetoed for legislative support services, and they weren't having that.
Yeah, so they overrode his veto, which is really rare in Florida.
So for our listener, just explain what it means to override a veto and why this was such a significant move by the legislature.
So overriding a veto basically means the legislature votes to overturn the governor's decision. To do that, it requires a supermajority vote, which isn't easy to get. It's a powerful check on the governor's authority. It shows that the legislature is serious about asserting its independence.
So not only did they challenge him on policy, they took back some control of their own funding.
Exactly. This wasn't just about the money. It was about sending a message. We're not going to be pushed around anymore.
Okay, so we have a governor whose power play backfired, a legislature that's found its voice, and a potential new player in the game.
Yeah, things are getting interesting down there.
I bet the Democrats are loving this.
Oh, they are definitely enjoying the show. They're outnumbered in the legislature, so they haven't had much power to influence things directly.
But they can grab some popcorn.
Exactly. They're just watching this unfold, and they've had some pretty funny quotes about, the king has fallen and comparing it to, like, a family squabble.
That's great.
But beyond the entertainment value, this Republican infighting raises an interesting question. Could this chaos create an opportunity for Democrats down the line? It's something to think about.
It is. It is.
It's definitely an interesting wrinkle in this whole situation.
All right, so before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's just make sure the listener has a clear picture of what's happened so far.
Right, so we've seen DeSantis, really trying to assert his authority with this immigration move, but it seems that his tactics maybe backfired a little.
Yeah, the legislature really pushed back, not just with the Trump Act,
Right.
but also taking back some of that budgetary power with the veto override. It really paints a picture of a governor who's maybe losing a little bit of control and a legislature that's not afraid to stand up to him.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty accurate assessment of the situation.
What does all this mean for the future of Florida politics?
Well, I think this isn't just a minor disagreement. This could have some serious consequences, both in the state and maybe even on the national stage.
Let's talk about those implications. DeSantis has been seen as this rising star in the Republican Party, even a potential presidential candidate. Could this whole thing hurt his image?
It definitely doesn't help, This inability to manage his own party and these strong-arm tactics that didn't really work out, it just doesn't look great for a leader.
So you're saying this Florida mess could have consequences all the way to the White House?
It's definitely something that I think political analysts will be watching very closely, Anyone who's thinking about DeSantis as a potential candidate for higher office is going to be looking at this very carefully for any signs of weakness.
Okay, so what about the legislature? They kind of tasted victory here, standing up to DeSantis and asserting their independence. Do you think they're going to keep challenging him?
I think that's the big question. This could be a turning point in their relationship now that they've shown that they're willing to push back. They might be more likely to take a more active role in shaping policy,
So we might see less rubber stamping and more actual debate and negotiation.
Right, exactly. I think that's a very real possibility. So yeah, Florida politics just got a lot more interesting.
We could be in for a real power struggle here.
Yeah, and don't forget the wild card in all of this. Donald Trump.
Ah, yes, of course.
His influence is still huge in Florida politics, and it's not clear how he's going to react to this.
Will he support DeSantis, his old pal, or will he go with the legislature in their Trump Act?
It's a tough one to call. Trump's endorsement carries a lot of weight in Florida, so his decision could really shake things up.
What do you think's motivating these guys? Is it pure politics, or is there like a genuine ideological divide here?
That's a good question. I think there are definitely political calculations involved, Both DeSantis and the legislature are trying to gain power and influence. But there might also be some real disagreements about policy, about what direction they want to take the state in.
Yeah, some of the articles you sent mentioned lawmakers being frustrated that DeSantis seems more focused on national issues than Florida's problems.
Right, exactly. There's this tension between state and national priorities, DeSantis, with his eye on the national stage, he might be more inclined to focus on things that play well with a national audience, while the legislature is more worried about the day-to-day concerns of Floridians.
So it's not just a power struggle, it's like a clash of priorities.
Yeah, and maybe even a difference in governing philosophies.
It's all happening against this backdrop of this really intense, divided political climate, both in Florida and nationally.
Absolutely, yeah.
Okay, so we've got a governor whose plan backfired, a legislature that's found its voice, and a potential new rival in the mix.
Yeah, it's a pretty wild situation.
What do you think's the most surprising part of all of this?
I think the most surprising thing to me is how willing the legislature was to just openly defy DeSantis. They haven't always been pushovers, but this level of pushback, it's kind of unprecedented, and it suggests that the balance of power might be shifting.
It's like they finally decided we're not going to be a rubber stamp anymore.
Exactly. And I think their use of that Trump Act, that was really smart. They managed to support the popular president while undermining DeSantis and boosting a potential rival all at the same time.
It's really a story worth watching.
Yeah, it's going to be interesting to see how this plays out.
Before we wrap up this part, let's go back to something we mentioned before. How are everyday Floridians reacting to all of this?
Well, it seems like it's really hit a nerve with people.
Like this is more than just the Tallahassee game.
It's tapping into some real anxieties and frustrations that a lot of Floridians are feeling right now.
What kind of anxieties?
Well, There are worries about the cost of living, housing prices, climate change, the quality of education. I think people are feeling squeezed, and they're not sure what the future holds.
And they're looking to their leaders for answers.
Right. But instead of seeing unity and action, they're seeing this power struggle that feels more about personal ambition than solving problems.
So this whole thing is just adding to their anxiety and frustration.
I think that's a fair assessment, yeah.
And it's happening against this backdrop of this really toxic political climate we've been talking about.
Yeah, it's creating this sense of unease, even among people who don't usually follow politics that closely.
So what does this mean for the future of Florida?
Well, it's hard to say for sure. This could lead to a more balanced, collaborative approach to governing, or it could just create more gridlock and dysfunction.
So as we leave our listener to think about all of this, what's the one thing you want them to remember from our deep dive today?
I think the most important thing to remember is that this isn't just about DeSantis and the legislature. It's about the future of Florida. It's a reminder that we all have a stake in this and that our voices matter.
That's a great point. We'll be back soon with another deep dive. Until then, stay curious.
Yeah, it's interesting how this is all kind of spilling out of the political world and impacting like everyday people in Florida. I wonder what this means for the state long term.
Yeah, I mean, it's not just a political game, right? It has real consequences for people.
And in these articles, there's definitely a range of reactions. Some people are praising the legislature for standing up to DeSantis. Others see it as a betrayal. It seems like this is really tapping into a deeper divide.
Yeah, for sure. It kind of mirrors that whole polarized political climate we're seeing everywhere these days.
Right.
People who already distrust DeSantis see this as proof that they were right to be worried.
And for the people who support him, this pushback from his own party has got to be kind of unnerving. Exactly, yeah. It makes you question what's next for the Republican Party in Florida, especially with those primaries coming up.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Those primaries are coming up soon. Do you think this whole power struggle could impact who comes out on top in those elections?
Oh, absolutely. It's exposed some serious cracks in the Republican Party, and things could get even messier as the primary race heats up.
So, candidates are going to have to pick a side in this fight.
Most likely, yeah. And that could alienate some voters and cause even more division within the party, so the stakes are pretty high.
It feels like Florida politics is at a crossroads right now.
Yeah.
This clash between DeSantis and the legislature could either lead to more gridlock and dysfunction, or it could be a chance to kind of reassess priorities and find some common ground.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
This whole deep dive has been a whirlwind.
It has.
From DeSantis's power play that kind of blew up in his face to the legislature saying, no, we're not doing that. The rise of Wilton Simpson and the potential ripple effects on the national political scene. It's like a political thriller, only it's real life.
Absolutely, yeah. You just never know what's going to happen next in politics, even in a state like Florida that we think we have all figured out.
Well, it's been great talking about all of this with you.
Yeah, this has been really interesting.
As our listeners process all this, what's the one big takeaway you want them to remember from this deep dive?
I think the most important thing is that this isn't just about personalities, it's about the future of Florida, you know? Right. What kind of state do we want to be? And it's a good reminder that we all have a role to play in shaping that future.
That's a great point. Well, this has given us all a lot to think about. Thanks for joining us on this journey through the world of Florida politics. We'll be back soon with another deep dive into something equally as fascinating. Until then, stay curious.